Welcome to PopUp Podcast, brought to you by the Escondido Public Library. Hello, my name is Teddy Borja. I'm a native Escondidan, and I got involved with the Friends of the Pioneer Room several years ago. And now I get to work with PopUp Podcast that shares stories of Escondido. You can listen and read more about the project at popuppodcast.org. You can listen and subscribe through iTunes. Today on the show, we are sharing stories that were collected at an event to commemorate the legacy of Morris and Ida Olmsted. Dave Olmsted, their son, and a local native, approached me about an idea to honor his parents. Let's start off by listening to Dave tell the story of how the dedication came about.
My name is David Morse Olmsted. I was born in Escondido on the shortest day of the year, December 21st, 1946, in the old hospital, which later became Sears and Roebuck, which would face Broadway on the west side between Grand and 2nd Avenue. I have fond memories of growing up in this community. It's been interesting seeing it develop into what it is today. Today's events started over a year ago, closer to 2 years ago, with the idea to have a bench installed down at Kit Carson Park in honor of my parents, Morse and Ida Olmsted. I've been a regular user of Kit Carson Park for some time, taking my dog Ben for walks down on the sidewalks and the back trails. However, about a year and a half ago, I chose to walk on a trail which I had not been on before, and it was a rather steep trail leading to the top of the hill due west of the Queen Calafia Magical Circle Garden. Proceeding up that trail halfway or so, I had to stop and rest. It was a steep incline, and I was pretty tuckered out. And all along, hoping to find a bench when I reached the top of the trail, because I was ready to sit down. Well, unfortunately, when I got to the top of the hill, there was no bench. And that's when the light bulb came on that we should have one up there. And I thought it would be a great idea for my brother and sister to join me in constructing one, placing it up on that hill for park users and people to use for years to come. That materialized into the placement of a nice granite, polished ruby red granite structure, and it is there now for the ages. I'm sure it's going to outlast any fires or collisions with fire trucks, windstorms that may come down upon it.
So Teddy and Dave, could you share some stories of teenage life in Escondido? I know you've shared some stories with me.
Teenage life was wonderful. You had the Ritz Theater, where that was the only theater. We had the drive-in theater, that was the only drive-in theater. So between that and also the arcade hall on Friday night dances, Saturday night dances, plus the Armory. It's a great place to grow up for teenagers. Plus Grand Avenue. Just seeing everyone Friday, Saturday, just cruising through town, going to Foster's, going through a place called G&A's, George and Ann's, just cruising there and stopping, saying hello, and that was pretty much it, and then there was always the parties out in the groves or up in the Wajita. It was a mythical place, let's say. Some place that if you tell people today, they'll say that didn't exist. But that was Escondido. Plus, the biggest show in town was Friday night football games, always, where they turned Broadway into a one-way street. After the game, it was all going down one way south because that was the big game. And, of course, the town was no more than, in those days, 15,000 by the time it was 65. Yeah, so everybody pretty much knew everyone else. It's a great place to be.
I can recall before Lefty's Ditch was incorporated.
What's that?
Lefty's Ditch was a storm channel, is a storm channel that provides for the water runoff from the east, and it's carried through the city streets and exiting out in Harmony Grove, where it later joins up with the Pacific Ocean at the San Alejo Lagoon and Cardiff by the Sea. But before the channel went in, I can recall with some of my friends as teenagers taking our surfboards and riding the creek from, say, Ash Street westerly down through Grape Day Park and getting out of the water. Must have been about Escondido Boulevard, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it was pretty amazing to see these inland surfers riding the Escondido Creek.
Yeah, through all the bamboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the Escondido Creek bamboo channel.
Is there anything you would want to share with the youth of today in Escondido that might be listening?
Well, I think the youth of today needs to maybe get away from that laptop a little more and get outside and experience what we have around us. This community offers so much. So many activities at Kit Carson Park, for example, as well as the Daly Ranch, Lake Wolf or Lake Dixon. There's just abundance of outdoor things that children could be partaking of, and it's essential that they mix it up, not just concentrate so much on high-tech learning and what they can do on the computer.
So some kind of balance there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's hear from Dave's sister, Sue Olmsted Jacoby.
When we got here, it was during the war, and there was no housing, so we found a little tiny apartment above an old house that the people who lived down below were chicken ranchers. So we lived there for 2 years, and then we moved to Valley Center for a year. Living on a hill in Escondido, it was easy to leave home and go ride your bike, but you always had to climb the hills coming home. I've never been so many places with hills, but we really had a good time. My parents were so active in the civic works around town. Dad was with the church, Chamber of Commerce, and Mom had her bridge club and worked in her garden. And then, of course, she was a chauffeur. And with 3 kids, you do a lot of chauffeuring. She would take us to the beach, and when we got older, she would participate in our activities that we did. I remember my mother and dad were so active in the downtown area of Escondido. My dad always wanted to beautify things. He was so happy when they were put in the streets, trees on the streets of Escondido, because he loved trees. And I guess after he retired, he was really involved with Escondido. And he went to a lot of things that he would go and count cows for the bank, being in the position he was in for banker's loans. And he would go out and count the cows and come home and give my mother the car that was empty of gas, which she would always run out. But also being in Escondido, we were able to go to the beach and go to the mountains in the same day if we wanted to. I mean, you had the surfing and the beach, and you had the mountains at Palomar, and I mean, there just wasn't any place that had all of this entertainment. You made the entertainment. The kids were really good to, we had fun with the kids. They got together real well. We didn't have any of these gangs. I mean, we didn't even know what a gang was, or drugs, or there wasn't any of that in school or anything. So I think our growing up in Escondido was, you were very naive when you got out in the outside world, because you expected everything to be like that. So, I mean, you didn't have kids drinking and driving like you do today. And of course, no drugs. And it was just, everything was happy. Everybody was free and able to go and do things at different places. So it has grown, but it's still beautiful. It still has the hills and the avocado trees and the orange groves.
Next, let's hear from the Olmsted's oldest son, George. Did you go to Escondido High?
I did. Class of 1959.
Okay, so you probably were in my sister's class. Her name was Gloria Borja.
I don't recall that name, but
Okay.
I don't remember what I had for breakfast. So
Look here. That's okay.
my name is George Olmsted. I came to Escondido at the age of 2 back in 1943 with my father and mother, Morse and Ida Olmsted, and my sister Sue. We lived above a chicken farmer's house on what is now Redwood Terrace across from Felicita School. My father was sort of the town banker for a couple of decades. Escondido was a population maybe 4,000, 4,500 in those days. So I saw the town grow, and my father helped grow it. Escondido was a very good place for a kid to grow up in. It was very safe. I had the run of the town from the age of 5 or 6. I remember we used to hitchhike to the beach when I was 10. You don't see that anymore. It was later there was organized sports, but the sports that I recall early on was we'd go down on Saturday morning. The City Parks and Recreation Department would help you choose up teams, and you'd go home and tell your mother that we're the Yellow Jackets and I need a T-shirt dyed yellow for next Saturday for my football team or my basketball team or my baseball team. It was very much a small town. There were no shopping malls. Main Street was the place. It was just a great place for a kid. I left Escondido pretty much at the age of 18 to go away to college. And after I went to law school at Stanford, and after I graduated from law school, I moved back to San Diego and practiced law in San Diego for about 38 years, and that's where I live now. People didn't eat out a lot in those days. That was a major event to go out to a restaurant. Today it's pretty much commonplace. We'd have, my mother was a fine cook, and we'd have family outings, and we'd have picnics, and we'd go to the beach sometimes and have a picnic at the beach, or we'd go down to Felicita Park, sometimes with other families. It was very nice.
Now, coming from Escondido, and you go to Stanford, did you have a big awakening?
My big awakening was when I went to Pomona College. I was the highest grade point average in the high school. I think I got 1 or 2 B's in 4 years, and I thought I was pretty smart. And boy, I tell you, when I got to Pomona College, it was a rude awakening. I mean, we had kids there that had already taken college physics and some other things, so that was my rude awakening. Stanford was tough too. It was very, very competitive and very smart people.
Any final parting words to the youth of Escondido that might be listening?
I have to recall one historic event,
Yeah.
and that's when they installed the first stoplight in Escondido. It was at the corner of Grand Avenue and Main Street, and everybody went down to watch the light change.
That's great.
That is. Which would Main Street be Broadway today?
No, Main Street would be, well, I'm sorry, Grand Avenue, which would be,
Grand and
yeah,
Broadway.
it was called Grand then, so it was Grand and Escondido Boulevard.
Escondido Boulevard.
Yeah, that's where the first stoplight was.
Wow. Interesting.
Well, another other fond memory was when the mirror for Palomar Observatory came through town. It stayed overnight on Ohio Street, and that was a big deal. That thing moved along at 2 or 3 miles an hour. They had to reinforce some bridges, I think, and maybe change some overpasses and things like that. But they got it up the hill, and that was a big thing for Escondido.
We also spoke with D.L. Mason, who started working at the age of 16 for Morris Olmsted.
I went to the Olmsted dedication put on by his children, and I had gone to work for Morris Olmsted, who was manager of Security Bank, in 1946. I was 16 and just before high school got out, and I worked part-time and then went to work full-time there and stayed with the bank for many years.
Where was the bank then?
The bank was on the corner of Broadway and Grand Avenue there. And right diagonally across the street was the Bank of America. And those were the only two banks of any description around here. I mean, Rancho Santa Fe at that time didn't have a bank, and a lot of people came over from the coast here.
So you were on the northwest corner of Grand and Broadway?
Yes. And that building is owned by Crone now. I don't know what's in it. And we stayed there, and then the bank bought that property down on Maple and Main Street and Grand Avenue. In about 52, I think 53, we opened there and just moved that office down there. And by that time, there were savings and loans and other banks in town.
And how did you end up working at the bank?
I don't know, too dumb to do anything else.
Okay.
How many years was Morris manager of the security bank in town?
I don't really know. From the time he was there a few years before I went to work there. And because George, his son, was 5. I can remember that in 46. And talking to George out there the other day, he's now retired attorney and living out there.
You don't remember when Morris retired?
No, I don't. When I came to Escondido in 39, I was 9 years old, and there were 5,500 people here then. That was the population. And I don't know whether that was just a city or it included out into the Orange Glen area or not. I honestly don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't very big. It was a farm community. When you work downtown, pretty soon you know 50% of the people. And as I said, Escondido was not big. The high school at that time, when I graduated in 46, had 750 people in it. That was 4 grades, and that included Valley Center, Poway, San Marcos. And
Rancho Santa Fe?
no, Rancho
San Marcos?
San Marcos, but not Rancho Santa Fe.
Okay.
They were a little better than we are. There were a lot of things that were good.
When the Saints go marching in, oh, when the Saints go marching